All right, everybody. My name is Luke Sims. I'm the Assistant City Planner for the City of Winona, and I'm co-leading the Comprehensive Plan update process with Carlos Espinoza. And as part of that process, we are in the meat and potatoes portion where we turn to our subcommittees to really begin working on the individual portions of the plan that support the overall document. There are 12 different subcommittees with 12 different subcomponents of the plan, of which community services and institutions is one. So the goal here today will be to give some background on why community services and institutions was created as a part of this plan, and then also what we anticipate going forward from all of you. And I will tell you right away that this is a little bit of a nebulous portion of the overall comp plan process because it was generated and created out of our phase one engagement. We saw a real need for the interconnectedness of community services across the city of Winona. But first, before we dive into all of that, I'd like to do introductions. This is a new group. We might not all know each other. And if everybody can just kind of go around and say hello, your name, and why you're interested in serving as a part of the comprehensive plan update. And I'll turn it over to Carlos while the rest of you think of your answers.
And for those that are here, we have the microphone, so just go ahead and when you're going to speak, go ahead and grab one and click it on right there and then hold it close so that the people who are joining us virtually can hear. My name is Carlos Espinoza, City Planner, and part of this process, because comprehensive planning is something that's core to my position as City Planner, but it's also core to, as I was just briefly discussing with some of the people here, it's also core to the future direction for the city in the next 10 to 15 years. It's something that we take a look back at after that time period has elapsed, and we take a look and say, hey, have we accomplished what we set out to do? And one good tidbit of information, the 2007 plan, we've completed about 80% of the projects that were in that plan. So the document and the thing that you're working on right now really is a plan that gets utilized on a daily basis. It doesn't sit on the shelf. So the input that you give is used by city staff, really will be used by city staff throughout the next 10 to 15 years, and taking a look at different things that they'll be working on. So with that, I'll pass it on to the next person.
I am Tina Schott. I'm the Executive Director of Winona HRA. I guess my interest in being on the committee is getting more involved in what is going on in the city and getting my organization to be part of the city more than it already is. So.
And I'm Ann Riebel. I'm the Community Education Director for Winona Area Public Schools. So, the stronger partnership we have within the city for the community benefits all of our families. And as the public school representative, that's important to us for longevity too.
I am Kelsey Scott. I am the Health Educator and SHIP Grant Coordinator for Winona County. I am interested in being involved because I love Winona first and foremost, and second because I'm in a great position with my role where I have training and working in comprehensive planning and can provide funding, so happy to be here.
I'm Leslie Dalkey. I'm the Library Director. I am interested, the library came up in several of the public comments as far as concerns on funding and resources, and so I'm here to see where we can further either streamline services or collaborate.
I'm Jen Gibson, and while I work for a software company out of Minneapolis, I'm on the board with Habitat and formerly Volunteer Services, and just am interested in ways that I can help to make our community better.
My name is Skylar DeGroat. I actually work for Leighton Broadcasting. I do sales and marketing over there. I've been looking at ways to get into the community, more involved. I have a lot of youth experience, mentoring, facility directing, and that kind of stuff. So I feel like that could kind of help, as we talk about youth and the centers and things for them. So I'm just happy to be here and really excited to try to improve Winona.
And Jerry, why don't you go ahead and say hi?
Hi, my name's Jerry Whitley Doust. I know several of you, but I'll just say that my wife and I have 5 children, And that includes one with both developmental and physical disabilities. And I'm involved because I too love Winona and the Winona community. And I've had my hands in lots of different volunteer opportunities throughout the years, including at the Winona Catholic Worker back in the 90s and early 2000s, and currently involved with refugee resettlement work through the Winona Sheltering Network.
And Kevin.
Hi there, my name is Kevin Krieg. I'm the Director of Riverway Learning Community. I am participating because I'm very interested in ensuring that the needs of students, community, staff, and basically the larger whole are met. So thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all very much for being here. I think it's clear that there are a number of people in Winona who just care about our community. And so many of you are already involved in doing that. And I want to thank you for taking an additional step to work with us so that we can also hopefully add elements of that to the comprehensive plan process. We did put together a short agenda here for us. We have it up on the screen. You should, or you may potentially have it as well. The work that we want to go through here today is to talk about the subcommittee summary framework. This is a framework that was proposed to the overall steering committee for what this subcommittee would accomplish. Discussion of the overall community engagement, and that's going to look at phase 1 of our engagement, which was the general engagement through the community. We spoke with approximately 2,000 different individuals, so about 10% of the total population. And as Leslie noted, some elements were repeatedly stated in that engagement process that we need to address. And then a brief discussion of tie-ins and other subcommittees. I highlighted 2 here. One is a need to address mental well-being and mental health in our community, which was brought up repeatedly by our transformative projects subcommittee. And then our land use subcommittee, economic development subcommittee, and heritage preservation subcommittees have kind of hit on this small network component of fine-grained urbanism creating elements or small spaces for entrepreneurial startups and entrepreneurial nonprofits to serve our community. And that's something that we can probably talk about a little bit here today as well. So with that, I'll turn to our second document, which we did send out in our initial calendar invite. And I'll turn it over to Carlos to maybe talk about what that summary looks like. For those here in person who don't have a copy, we have copies for you.
And I'm going to pass this down to Kelsey so that she has it. So what we did with every subcommittee is put together just a brief framework of kind of what we're looking to accomplish with each subcommittee so that committee members know kind of what you're here to do and what we want to take a look at. And so you see at the summary at the top, what we're here to do is just to explore community services and then future service needs, goals, objectives, and policies and strategies. So what we would see this group doing, in addition to what our other groups have been doing, is after kind of laying the groundwork for really what this committee would be comprised of, taking a look at goals and objectives moving forward. And so this committee would work on a set of goals and objectives, and then staff would work on strategies to implement those goals and objectives. And so what would happen is towards the end of our time together, what we'd like to try and do is identify somebody that could help move this committee's proposal forward to our steering committee. From the steering committee, it goes to the planning commission and city council. What we're hoping to do is have a draft of the comprehensive plan put together by this fall. And then that'll go out for public input, and we'll do a second draft. And we're looking to sum everything up by June of next year. So this is something that your work now will be hopefully enshrined into the comprehensive plan final document by June 2023. So some discussions of overall topics and focus areas. So coordination, this was a big one between public institutions and schools on capital projects, and not just capital projects, but also important initiatives that people are working on. Also desired enhancement to existing community services, where are some gaps or some improvements that could be made given emerging needs. And that goes right into desired new community services and what we heard from our first phase of public engagement, what people are seeing. We heard from over, 3,000, or I forget the number.
A bit over
A
2,000.
bit over 2,000. Yeah, so about 10% of our population during the first round of public engagement, which is really, really good for a comp plan. It's a lot of people that we heard from, and the responses from the people that we heard from are incorporated right into the subcommittee on the subsequent pages of this document. So we'll go over those in just a couple seconds here. And then increasing equitable access to services. So recognizing that some people need a little bit more access to resources than others do, and some people may need a little bit more help to get to the same place that others than what others would need. So overall committee product, again, like I said, goals, objectives, and then staff will work on policies and strategies, and that gets put into the comprehensive plan. So we're looking to meet throughout the rest of, well, this month here. Well, it's not too much longer here, but then into July, and sum up by the end of August is our timeline.
Are there any initial thoughts from this subcommittee related to either examples of those discussion topics or the general summary? I was mentioning to Skylar right before we began, this is really going to be pretty broad-based, that we want you, the subcommittee, to direct us on where you want to see this go. So before we do dive into that background phase 1 engagement, are there any initial thoughts about what this direction for the subcommittee is, or feedback that you want to give based on this document thus far? I'm seeing some head shakes. Nobody's grabbing a microphone. Nobody's raising their hand online. Perfect. We'll go ahead and move right into that phase 1 engagement. So on the next few pages of this document, we summarized some of the engagement that we heard from the phase 1 process with Engage Winona. And Engage Winona has done a really good job of reaching out to people. I do want to note, though, that we know that, like most surveys, it skews toward more educated people, people of more affluence. So we know that there are some caveats that come with a survey, even if it does touch 10% of our population. So let's go ahead and keep that in mind as we do read through here, that we do want to capture underrepresented and underserved voices, or at least goals to help serve those populations as well. So I mentioned at the start here that we really only started with 10 topics. We knew that we were going to grow the supporting topics of the comp plan to include at least 2 more. Downtown and Riverfront was the other one that emerged from public engagement, and then community services and institutions, which is why we're all here today. So we want to unpack what these actually look like. And the first issue, the first thing to look at is the connections to values. So community services really does connect to values of lifelong learning, livability, and interconnected community. So a lot of what we heard from that engagement was the desire to maintain and enhance our small town feel. And by small town feel, we mean we know our neighbors. We go to the grocery store and we bump into people and we end up talking to them for 4 minutes rather than grabbing the oranges we set out to go get. Or we end up feeling loved and respected by those who we are around. And then we also want to cover the plan theme of equity. I touched on that in underserved and underrepresented populations before, but how can we ensure that we are increasing access? How can we ensure that we are helping people feel that they can get the support that they need? So our first issue and idea that came out of that engagement was community spaces. And participants were often mentioning spaces for kids from early childhood through teens, along with spaces for older adults. And I want to highlight this, or add to this, in that we know that across the United States, about only 20% of homes are going to be occupied by traditional nuclear families. We know that we still have kids growing up in then multiple spaces. So they might have one home in Winona, for example, they might have a home in a different community. We also know that we have an aging population of people who are going into their second home, maybe their last home, maybe they want to live and age in place. But are there any thoughts here related to these community spaces and how we can serve those younger members of our population specifically, and also our older members of our population specifically? What seems to resonate amongst these bullet points, or what doesn't resonate? What are you surprised by?
I just noticed I'm working on the community health needs assessment right now too. And I did notice a correlation between people in that assessment and this survey needing some sort of indoor space to go for connection and health, especially during the winter. That was the biggest hindrance to people was that there's nowhere to go in the winter to be healthy.
And Kelsey, can you elaborate? Is that specifically related to athletics or fitness, or is it really just a space to go be?
It's just use of the community resource, a space to go be.
Where you don't necessarily have to have a membership or something like that.
Affordable. This especially came up with our, we do a translated survey with Project Find constituents, and that was a big thing that came up with them. Their kids don't have anywhere to go. They don't have anywhere to go to like be a community, especially in the winter.
Jerry, I see that hand raised. You can go ahead and unmute whenever you want and just talk.
I just wanted to second that thought and maybe tag Anne as well. I know this has been a theme both in our own lives with our own family, and I think it's been something that's been a concern for like ECFE families over the years. And if you look at how heavily used the parks are as a community space during the warm months, but then really the options for where to go, even to get out of the house and just have a mental health break, you know, in the dead of winter. There's the library, which is great when it's open. But then another space would be great. But, and am I off base with this, or you want to talk to that?
No, I appreciate that, Jerry. This has been on my mind a lot as we're doing proposals and strategic plans with the school district as well. I'm not going to be, community education is going to be buying a bus so that we can be mobile and gather people. And I'm going to be looking at the library actually for some partnerships. But then also, like, we even opened up the high school this winter for walking time in the morning for people so they could be a safe place to walk in the morning. But our participation isn't high. So we need to be creative about how we work together to pull people in. And because it was free, you just had to register so that we can give you a badge. So that when people are asking you, what are you doing in there? Well, I got my pass. I'm good. You don't, because we have security issues with the school district as well. We just have to be creative about how we use our space. And also, I'm just going to ramble a little bit. Like our gym space and if we're talking about healthy facilities, our gym space, because I do the facility rental, my department does, we are booked in our gyms after school until 10 o'clock at night. I mean, all of our gym space is used by community programs, but that doesn't mean that every Sunday afternoon isn't. We need to make sure that if we hire staff and we can figure out some partnerships that we really make sure they're utilized. Same way as you guys run underneath a budget, we run underneath a budget. And if we can't justify having a staff member on to open something up, we can't do it. We just don't have the extra funds. That doesn't mean that we can't utilize them different. It doesn't also mean that we shouldn't be advocating as this next facility referendum goes through with the school district about how we can build a partnership with other programming. And I'm meeting with Laura later today about some things too. But we're going to be having a referendum coming up, and we really need to think about how we can use additional space, because there's a proposal for, and the gym's not the only thing you need a community space, but how we can make that work a little bit differently. It's good for me to hear these things too, but then also see how I can partner with other people.
This is Leslie. I think transportation is a big issue that we run up against too. And I know the city has looked at revamping the T-bus schedule. I don't know if it's enough because we still don't have a whole lot happening after 5 p.m. for offerings. Since the pandemic, the library is open 9 to 5. So when we work with the warming center folks seasonally, there's a gap between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. and then 5 p.m. to like 8 p.m. Where folks downtown that don't have transportation just don't have a place to be warm to be. And then we end up getting into trespass issues, loitering, and So yeah, it's tricky. It's definitely tricky. And we run up against the same thing with staffing. And not that we aren't able to look at library hours and further expanding, but we used to be open till 8, 9 o'clock at night and the people didn't come. So it's hard to know what works because people will say, well, we want a nighttime story time. We're working parents. And then we offer nighttime programming and nobody came. Right. Right. And of course, we lost staff throughout the pandemic now too. So it's even dicier to try and offer more. I mean, we're all running up against the same crunches, but just my 2 cents.
One of the themes that we've been hearing from a lot of the other subcommittees related to that, you might end up planning that second story hour or that second programming block, but people aren't hearing about it. Communication is continually something that we hear from this. And it seems like there's a room for partnership, particularly from this committee's recommendations across multiple different institutions in our community to really focus on communication. So we're seeing that. So community spaces, community staffing, communication, transportation. That's kind of the 4 takeaways I'm getting from this first bullet point.
Well, that also kind of leads us into the second bullet point as well, in terms of better communication and or citizen involvement in city programming and decision making. And I would add to that, not just city programming and decision making, but programming and decision making amongst all of our institutions that we represent. I was wondering if, so I can get a better idea, maybe for those who are here, if we could talk a little bit about how communication works right now amongst some of your different organizations, and maybe some ideas that maybe you have had for either changing that or improving that into the future, or are there things that, for instance, the city could do in order to help facilitate some type of platform for communication. One thing that we have some difficulty doing is, for instance, our city departments. Some of them have Facebook pages. Some of them do a great job, like the library and our park and rec department, but other ones that are responsible for it just can't keep up. So one thing that we have talked about and has come up in our accessible government subcommittee is a communication coordinator that would be able to stay on top of that type of stuff. So I'm not sure if that's something that your organizations have run across or discussed in the recent past.
I'm seeing some head nods from people, but maybe I'll call on people. Anne, why don't you tell us how communication works for Winona Area Public Schools and what you want to improve?
We made an investment in a position right before COVID, and it dramatically increased our visibility in the community on the positive side. And that person is wonderful. John does a great job at what he is, but we could have 2 Johns. Just because of the demand with social media and the expectations of our public now are different than what they were 15 years ago about where they go for their information, how quickly they get it, and they want to get it now, and they want it right before, and they want a reminder. So that's that. And even as I've watched that position change in the last 10 years, because we've had somebody before, the demands with social media have and the expectations of our society have changed the amount of communication that we need to do. But it's huge. It's and making sure that we had some listening sessions with Project Find too, about how do you want to receive your information? What can we be doing better? And not every population wants the same social media platform. So you really have to be ready, is what we're finding, to be on a couple of them. And I'm glad that's not my area of expertise. So yeah, that's been a good investment for the school district, especially if you want referendums and bonds and tax platforms and things like that to go forward.
So could you maybe talk about when you do send things out, where are you seeing that primary engagement? And you mentioned that it's increased drastically. What would you say your biggest positive takeaway is in terms of who are you reaching or who are you seeing appearing to things that you weren't reaching before, for example?
I think there's different age groups that we go through, because we still send out a catalog, and that we cannot get away from that. That is an investment, and we have a state. I mean, we do as community education statewide. we do regular research on making sure that we are advertising, because community education has to pay for itself. There aren't referendum dollars that are going to keep it going. So we need to make sure that we're hitting our targeted population. We still need printed format that goes out to every mailbox, and that is a consistent research point in any community across the state. But a younger population is, you need to tag into your Facebook and all those other, there's another group that is more of a Snapchat. I mean, that's the next group of coming up. So if we want to get things out to our youth, we need to be hitting up a different one than if we're getting them out to our young parents. And so it's just interesting, and that's why I said I'm glad I'm not. That's John's area, because you need to stay up on top of that, and they all need a little bit different focus, because different age groups are coming through looking for different expectations about how they get their information. So it's a lot to keep up on, but it's a way to get things out quickly. It's a way to, they're not going to the news station, even on snow days. They don't look to your local TV station or radio anymore. They are looking for their social media feeds to find out if they have a snow day. It's that basic, where people automatically used to tune in, and they don't go there anymore for that information. So
That's a really great takeaway. And I suppose one thing I want to touch on maybe that you were talking about is, you're able to put that out, you're able to invest, you want to have even a second person potentially doing this type of work. Do other organizations, or do those here at the table, and by at the table, I mean everybody on Zoom as well, those here in this group, do you feel that you have adequate resources to add new communication tools or communication personnel, or does this end up having to be a community lift based on the size of organization or other aspects like that? And maybe I'm going to put Kevin on the spot. You also are in education. Do you feel similarly? Can you talk to us about how you operate and what's been successful?
My background is in both bigger districts as well as smaller charter schools. I can tell you exactly what Anna's describing is exactly what we would love to have. Our size fundamentally prohibits us from adding the personnel that would be required to do that. And so a lot of it is, it's handled in-house, but I can't pretend for a second that with the very small staff that we have, it can be handled effectively and efficiently, and sometimes even in like a timely manner. And that was really, really highlighted when it especially came down to the pandemic and those kinds of responses, when you had exposures or shutdowns, or a letter needs to go out. I can tell you that Riverway would very much appreciate a community lift in that area, and it would be very beneficial.
Definitely. Thank you. That helps. Jen.
Is this on? So, just wanted to kind of echo from like Habitat and volunteer services. I know that they both really struggle in that area as well, of communication, and people always saying, I don't know where to go to get food, and I don't know where to go. My roof is caving in. All these things that we have services for, where people don't know that we have services for them. We've seen, there are smaller organizations here in town too, who have seen some help through bringing in like college interns to do communications, who, are doing a lot more than they can't pay for that position. They're bringing someone in for free who will do it. Is it the best solution? Probably not, but it is something. And the same with those organizations, and needing the newspaper, needing radio ads, needing Facebook. But even now, Facebook is for old people, TikTok and Instagram and all of the different ways to reach a full population is a challenge.
Some years ago, when the Early Childhood Initiative was more active, we piloted a community calendar idea that was meant to be kind of a one-stop shop for families. And it was a great concept. And Jerry, you were a part of getting that off the ground so many moons ago. But the trick was that is definitely a full-time job. And as soon as you push publish, it's outdated information and needs an edit. So we just ended up kind of chasing our tails, trying to keep it relevant. But I will say at the library, we certainly do a lot of social media marketing. Facebook is our #1 way to push out programming. We still also have a newsletter. People want all the formats. And it's certainly not an 8 to 5 job. We handle a lot of our patron requests after 8 p.m. Between 8 and 11 p.m. we have a library or myself, a librarian or myself that takes turns responding to folks because that's when they want to know what's happening at 8 a.m. the next morning. And sometimes we play operator. It's not even necessarily library related. It's just, we're human Google. So who do I ask? Well, let's ask the library, which is great, but it's a commitment.
I've tried a couple different things over the years with those community calendars or the initiatives, because even we had like a resource page and it's still there in Live Well Winona about family resources, but you wonder how well we advertise that in our community so families know that, like when you talked about that, I have a need for food or a need for a place for recreation. I don't think we do an adequate job of sharing what we do currently have in our community so that people know that it can be triggered, because if it's not been hit enough times in a search engine, it doesn't pop up to the top, and then it gets lost in the weeds of the search engines out there. So I think there's some basic ground starts of different things in there. It's just making sure that they're sustainable, because again, interns are great, but as soon as they're done with their internship, then you lapse a little bit with your communication. It's hard to make it sustainable because everybody is in public organizations, we're on a budget. And so making sure that we are able to figure out a way to do it and sustain the communication part of it and the consistency is a challenge that would be interesting to see if we can address.
That does marketing constantly. I can just echo everything. You need to market and communicate in every facet. It's not just Facebook. It's not just one thing. And it's to your point, like the newsletter, it's got to go out because it's not a barrier. Someone, they can get it to their home, but you're not looking, they might not have Facebook or the internet. So you need that part. And then you need the Facebook because that's who follows you. But then you need radio and other things to get new people. And so it is a lot. I work with a lot of nonprofits, and usually it's someone that's on the board or does even work for them, or you know what I mean, or just helping out. And so, yeah, I would just echo that it is a lot of work to do that. So.
Thank you all very much for those thoughts. Jerry, it looked like you were about to say something. I picked up my microphone and you paused. So let's go to you.
Sorry, I'm keeping myself muted so you're not hearing all the bird song and everything here. I was just going to bring up the Winona Neighbors Helping Neighbors Facebook page, or Facebook group rather, as kind of a related thought. I just think it's so fascinating watching what goes on that page, and I guess maybe bookmarking the thought that what would it be like to grow that model somehow, or even to look at that and the kinds of things that people are posting on there and helping one another solve each other's problems. How can that be supported or accelerated or expanded? Does that provide us a model at some point to look at?
Yeah, and we can definitely connect with Engage Winona, since they're doing our engagement anyway for this project, to really maybe get the lowdown on how many volunteer hours do they have moderating that? Because I know that we have a lot of volunteers moderating that page, for example. And if that's going to be the model, then we need to maybe take a serious look at what the actual investment is going to be community-wide and where we find the will and the financial ability to actually implement something like that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to point number 3 here. I know that communication is probably something that all of us could talk about for hours on end. So this also addresses community spaces that are open more hours and are located across the city. And one thing that we continually hear are not having bathroom facilities present in community gathering spaces and the general gaps for people who are experiencing homelessness. Homelessness is something that is also being brought up in our housing subcommittee as well. So a connection there, and how can we make sure that we have adequate support for people who are experiencing either transient or chronic homelessness? Any thoughts related to this point from this group?
And just from discussion a little bit more prior, the issue can be, people saying that they want something, but then if they're not showing up, for instance, for those evening type events or evening hours, not being able to sustain that or justify that. I think that definitely comes into the mix here. Just speaking from my experience, having the beer garden, that's not a community service per se, but just open hours. You want to be open, but if nobody's there on a Wednesday night, it makes it difficult to justify having two people as staff, and sometimes even being open. So definitely, I can feel the pain and the tough decision that's being made where you want to offer that service, but it's hard to justify at times. And I think since we don't really have a lot of thoughts or at this point in time on number 3, trust, transparency, access to government. Number 4, this is one thing that our accessible government subcommittee is taking a look at. So maybe just have some of the stuff in the back of your mind, but they're really focusing on some of the points that are brought up here under number 4. So what I'd like to do is jump down to numbers 5 and 6, just metrics and tracking outcomes under number 5. Maybe some of your ideas about how to do that. And then collaborations and partnerships to address mental health, substance abuse, poverty, and more. The mental health and substance abuse and drugs and the prevalence of that is something that, not necessarily the mental health part of it, but the number of times with our engagement phase 1, the number of times drugs were mentioned as an issue locally here or in the community, it surprised me. And so I was wondering if we can talk a little bit about that and how collaborations are currently working to address these things and what some needs might be out there at the present time.
And maybe this might be something, Kelsey, I'm going to put you on the spot. The community health needs assessment. You all do a lot of great work tracking things. I believe it's every 3 years, and really hearing from people who typically we wouldn't hear about. As Carlos mentioned, sometimes we are surprised by the elements of our community that we don't necessarily hear from. Do you have any insight related to that?
So as far as I guess recreational drug use goes, it went down over the past 3 years, which was kind of shocking to me considering COVID and all of the mental health issues that we have as a result of COVID. As far as community partnerships, I know ASAP is doing amazing work on, prescription drug take back days and focusing on tobacco cessation and focusing on strategies working with the schools for getting kids to either quit smoking or not start smoking at all. But I know that the schools also it's a resource issue with staffing or, who's going to do this? Does this fall to the teachers? Does this fall to administration? So I know that there are things going on there as well. I'm trying to think of what else. The biggest, not necessarily drugs, but we did see a significant increase in drinking over the past 3 years, again, probably due to COVID. But I guess my point is, while this survey says that drugs are a big issue, the data that we have doesn't necessarily reflect that, but same thing, it's a survey. It could be skewed. We do weight it for based off of population because we don't get all of the population with the survey. But yeah.
with the school district, I also lead the student support services department, which is our counselors and our social workers. Now we have student success coaches. And I'm going to agree with you. I think that our substance abuse, it's not gone away. I think our mental health has gone up and the need for mental health has gone up, but maybe not for chemical dependency treatment. That's what we're getting from our data collection as well. And we don't have a mental health representative at the table, but I do know, like, when we are working with our school link mental health programs, and a couple other, like, I'm sitting on the Winona County Collaborative as well, because I am the director for that. But there is a shortage of those professionals in our community as well. And so even if a family knows that they need that support, it can take months to be able to see someone, and that's too late. And so I do think that that's issue that needs to be addressed in our community. And I know that those programs that I communicate with in the community, they're working hard on it as well. But just like we can't get licensed teachers to come into the community, they're struggling to find the correct licensure of professionals to meet those needs as well. And so when that goes to housing and availability and reasons to move to Winona, and you need to be competitive with your salary, but you also need to be able to find a place to live that's affordable. Then if you need childcare, you need to have all those different things so we can pull those professionals into our community to address these issues. But I'm going to agree with you, Kelsey. I think I see more the demand in our programs for that mental health support. And I think we'll see more with housing. I'm starting to see a little uptick of it with the COVID relief funds that were there for housing, or in some of those and Tina, you're going to talk about that too, so I don't want to go into your area, but a lot of those bans that were put on declining people's enrollment are going away, and we're starting to see that pop up as well. And again, there's a shortage of options for people, but that's your department, so I'm going to just ask that.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for everyone in the low income housing was the incapability of applying for the services. First, we sent out everything that said, hey, these options are here. No one applied. We went months and months and months where people were not paying rent. Well, of course, we're not doing any evictions. I took the initiative with the direction and the okay of my board, and I brought in every family that owed even 1 penny and sat them down and applied for the programs with them. I spent months at a time doing this, but I was able to recoup over $200,000 of unpaid rent just off the Rent Help Minnesota by bringing in the people to do the work with them and for them. Half of them don't have emails. They don't understand what this means. They don't understand what that means. Oh, we want a copy of this. I just sat down and did it with them. And I was the only organization with the Rent Help that did that. I can tell you, we have not had an eviction at all for COVID for unpaid rent. We have no intention of any unpaid rent evictions. We have set up payment plans. We have worked with people. We have done a lot of communication, because evicting the people is not taking care of the problem. The problem is not just that person's problem. And I think I met with someone, the hub committee today, and we are going to be partnering with them as well. They are a group or organization that we're able to do referrals to them for everything from transportation to medical to having everybody being taken care of. And this hub is just immense. And getting the people the help instead of evicting them and just making it someone else's problem is huge. We are dealing with so much mental health. A lot of people used to think it was all crime. It's not crime. It's not the police. It's not over policing. It's the mental health, and we're not dealing with the mental health. I think we don't have enough mental health and social work out there to resolve the issues. And if we would all work together and try to get the organizations together. And that was something that I'm working with the police department on. We've, you know, Tom and I meet weekly, and it's crazy on what the two of us just can do together to prevent things, to keep the kids occupied. We now have a parent group that every day they have an event going on at our activity room. We haven't had a parent group in the last 12 years that I've been there. And just getting more involvement and letting the kids know that there's stuff to do. They don't have to be bored. They don't have to go around kicking indoors and causing crimes. We have something for them to do. And making it available is huge. I know I had a little bit of resistance from the school district. For the previous years, I've always done the food and nutrition program. One year we had construction on our building, so we couldn't have it because we didn't have no entrances in or out safely for the children. Well, now that we are open again and wanted to do the lunches, we couldn't. And I'm like, but these are the groups of kids that needed the services. They didn't have the staffing to staff the kids with our behaviors, the children that have behaviors, a low income. So I said I would provide the HRA. We'll provide transportation to the locations. We will provide a bus. Well, we won't have enough food because we haven't estimated that large amount of number. I was feeding 90 kids a day. Pre-COVID, 90 kids a day. And now I basically was told, nope, you can't be a site. And now I actually now got a site, but I had to go through many, many channels and do a lot of arguing with people. But I have 60 lunches coming, 60 lunches. So now I'm to the point where, okay, now who do I say gets food and who doesn't?
And I'm not making excuses, but
Yeah.
I'm even more concerned about that because we've for sure. I'm more concerned about that as well too, because again, like you said, it's not crime, it's mental health. But when we can't provide the staff and we can't provide the food, and all of our free meals are going to go away, that the school district has been doing this coming year, because that's not covered anymore through the USDA. That's going to cause an increase for families' needs as well. That they're really going to need that, and some of the funding that goes for these free meals actually comes out another part of the district's budget, like our free breakfasts. So it's hard to make all the funds stretch. And it's incredibly hard. Like you said, you were probably one of the only housing organizations that actually sat down and helped all those families fill out the paperwork. The paperwork that some of these families have to go to even to qualify for the health insurance to get their mental health needs is a high level reading. And it's those community hub members that we need to get more of, and make it a norm that people can come in and help get those forms filled out. Because if you can't do that first application to get health insurance to cover your mental health appointment, you just stop asking for help because it's too hard. And so there's a lot of barriers, and that's not just Winona. That's all over for those things.
We piloted a social worker in the library spring semester through Winona State, Ed Hadeen. He's a good human. And it was amazing in the amount of people that he was able to help with that sort of thing. Heat assistance, rent assistance, finding housing, finding transportation, creating Gmail accounts to apply for unemployment. Very basic needs that take a lot of librarian time outside of tax season when it's time for everybody to get their copies made. So he was great. It was an amazing offering, and we're hopeful that that Winona State will have another skilled social worker student fall semester. Career Force has been coming, and adult basic ed is started now at the library as well. So all good things for sure. But there's not enough.
And it's piecemeal together because again, like you said, you're using ability level really depends on.
Finding out if we're first program, which is our after school program for the kids that live in the low income, because we are funding the majority of it. We are paying for the space. We pay for all the supplies, anything that they need, and Winona State pays the salary of the director of it, which was being an EBT experienced staff member. Carol Marchant retired, and the president of WSU is all go for kids first. But the go is way too slow. They have not had any hiring committee started. So now in the fall, our Kids First is going to sit empty. There's going to be 400 Winona State students that will be going through to have to do their class time, and there won't be anybody there to maintain it and direct it because things aren't moving fast enough. And so it's like the kids are the ones that are going to be without. They're knocking on the doors and the windows. When is Kids First going to open? When can we have stuff to do? You know, it just sucks that it's everything else holding up for these kids.
I've only lived in Winona for about 4 years now, but I've kind of heard and that it would be nice to have like a Boys and Girls Club standalone facility. I've actually managed, directed Boys and Girls Clubs in Minnesota, St. Cloud, Minnesota, and also Brookings, South Dakota. We took care of a lot of these things. It's the morning meals, the afternoon, it's the meals, it's the snacks, it's the tutoring, it's the everything. It's a safe spot. It was $10 a year to go. Just a membership. It's not a fee-based after-school program. And so I never knew if there was even a thought or like if there used to be one, because after-school fee-based programs are different than a standalone club where it's just based on grants and, you know what I mean, funding and stuff like that. So I was just curious.
And I think people need to know that like the Boys and Girls Club is different than the Y.
It is.
Totally different. They were totally different. I think too, with some change, I think it'd be interesting for Tina, for you and I to talk about targeted services coming there. Before that wasn't always an option to partner, and like, you know, different people have territorial things. We've tried to bring in things different before. But I think we have an opportunity now that with targeted services, but again, that only, which is some of your tutoring, it only touches a certain population. It's very limited, and you have to have a community foundation behind you for some of those Boys and Girls Clubs to be able to make them sustainable. And we haven't had that sustainability in Winona with that funding, with the community foundation, because even keeping the Early Childhood Initiative going, it takes a lot of volunteer times and a lot of in-kind time from other organizations. And COVID hurt that a lot because a lot of people were just trying to keep their programs alive. But we need to look at how we can rejuvenate that, because there's been a lot of different things here and there in the past, and we need to get them moving again. There's still a pot of funds, but again, they need to be a regular, sustainable fundraising event that puts into that. So whether it's a Boys or Girls Club or an after-school organization, it's the funding sources that we need to be that are sustainable, because we don't even have United Way anymore. I mean, we had United Way for quite a few years that would support some of these things, and that's gone. Yeah. Yeah.
They do have a Winona office. Yeah, but it's over above. It's over kind of by Island City in that nice tall building. HBC's below, and then yeah, so they do have an office there, but they don't have really a presence. I know they're trying to change that because there is a need in Winona, but they don't really. They're in between executive directors right now. They've never really been in Winona. I mean, that's kind of the feeling that they've got too. I've talked to them, so but yeah.
Apologies, it's hard to read the room on the Zoom. I'm going to explain a small problem that we have at Riverway and then kind of propose like a larger community solution. We hire a social worker. We actually need a counselor, and then we need, you know, an SEL instructor. And so that position ends up handling a lot of things. But what we tend to see very often in terms of the mental health is Riverway would very much benefit from a position that was focused on mental health, but I'm going to use the term on call. But what I really mean is it might be scheduled at a different time, from say 3 to 10 o'clock at night. Because one of the things we see is when there's a mental health crisis, or when kids need to reach out very specifically for either an intervention or a decompression, then it doesn't happen, and then it spirals into a night of they don't sleep, then it comes into school, and then, the cycle repeats itself. Where I'm going with it is I feel like the educational institutions could very much benefit from a position that was really like staff kind of in off hours. And when I say on call, I don't mean a person who's sitting around waiting for something to happen. I mean, all of the people who are on this, hey, we can't get in to see the psychologist or the counselor for the next 6 months, that they're on a very direct call list. And so when a crisis or something is not happening, they're very actively reaching out to people who might be on a waiting list. Another awkward situation we tend to see is, so-and-so is on a 72-hour hold. They had some suicidal ideation. They'll release the student to us, but the requirement is they have to be able to see somebody in a certain amount of time frame, but we can't get that arranged because our own person is like totally booked. So kind of where I'm going with it is that would be a really interesting conversation to have in more depth as to what that possibly looks like. And if that position, when I say on call, it was really like proactive based on a list that we could put people on. So thank you.
That's a great suggestion and really good conversation. And I'm going to do something that I hate doing, but I'm going to look at the clock, and I want to make sure that we set our next meeting date before we get either continuing our conversation or people have to start to leave. I was hoping that maybe we could just look a simple 2 weeks out to the 12th of July. That's Tuesday, the 12th. And if 12 p.m. continues to work for most people, and I think it will work for people who also did not attend today, can I get some thumbs up, head nods? Everybody, oh, and no. And is there a better time on the 12th, or is the 12th the problem? Okay. If another day aside from Tuesday the 12th worked for you, yes. Anything except Monday or Tuesday, would the 13th at 12 p.m. work for everybody in this group? Seeing head nods, thumbs up. Kevin, you look okay? Perfect. We will plan on the 13th at 12. Oh, perfect. All right. I want to thank all of you for great conversation here today. I want to thank you for showing up, being willing to be a part of this process. And when we get together on the 13th at noon, we will begin addressing maybe some of these larger concepts that we were all talking about. I think that we recognize that maybe what we heard was on the right track, and there's also some additional detail that needs to come out from all of you because you know better than we do. But other than that, I want to thank you all for your time, and we'll see you in about 2 weeks. Thanks.